Step into the magic. Watch the stories come to life. This is a celebration. Every color shines so bright. Turn on your light. Come on and live the magic. So much to find. Come on and live the magic.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of Live the Magic. In this show, we look deeper into many of the Disney Parks' current attractions and shows. In today's long-awaited and also long-overdue episode, one which has literally been on the idea board for literally 4 straight years now, we will be reviewing the history of the Magic Kingdom of Walt Disney World's legendary and long-running Disney Festival of Fantasy Parade, just in time for the 10-year anniversary of its premiere, which just so happens to be the very day this is being released. Now, hang on to your hats, everyone, because away we go. The history of this parade could truly start anywhere, but for the sake of timing, we're going to start off on December 5th of 2001. As alongside Walt Disney World's 30th anniversary, the resort began a year-long celebration in honor of what would have been Walt Disney's 100th birthday, known as the 100th Year of Magic. Coming off the heels of the resort's first major celebration the year prior with 1999 and 2000's Millennium Celebration, alongside such additions as a giant sorcerer's hat in the center of Disney MGM Studios and a few sparse new attractions, the true focus of the event was new entertainment offerings. These new offerings came almost exclusively in the form of new parades, and in fact, all 4 of the Walt Disney World theme parks received new parade-based offerings during the course of the celebration. At Epcot, the Millennium Celebration Tapestry of Nations Parade was rethemed into the Tapestry of Dreams Parade.
Same kind of thing, different name.
Animal Kingdom got the charming Mickey's Jammin' Jungle Parade, MGM Studios got the famed Disney Stars and Motor Cars Parade, and the Magic Kingdom received the spectacular new Share a Dream Come True Parade. This new parade in particular was meant to be a direct tribute to the birthday boy himself, Walt Disney and his legendary creations. But in addition to this endearing theme, the parade made history as it was also entirely new, with not a single reused float. In comparison, the offering that Share a Dream Come True replaced, 1996's 25th anniversary Remember the Magic Parade, featured a mishmash of a few new floats, but also several reused from parades of the past. Share a Dream Come True instead featured 6 gorgeous new parade floats that brought the legacy of Walt Disney to life like never before. Not only were the new parade floats pretty to look at, all 6 of them also featured elements that would spin, fill with smoke or confetti, or have some other magical moment take place during show stops that would occur in various places along the parade route. Even in the slump year that was 2001 as a whole, the parade was an instant classic, with a charming and catchy soundtrack, beautiful visuals, and a heartfelt theme to boot. The parade remained long after the 100th Year of Magic celebration ended, and despite an incident in 2004 and some minor changes to the floats and operations, the parade retained as a classic for many years to come. By 2006, though, with 5 years of service under its belt, Disney began looking into the possibility of replacing Share a Dream Come True. However, the idea of this replacement came at a cost. Literally. As they were going to have to develop a new parade, it would have to cost money, and quite a bit of it at that, so plans for an entirely new parade were thrown out, but Disney still wanted to inject some new life into the existing parade. The show stop feature had become an operational headache after all these years, and given the new direction the company as a whole was going with the newly appointed CEO Bob Iger at the helm, it was decided to make some changes. The new version of Share a Dream Come True, now dubbed Disney Dreams Come True, held its first performance on August 10th, 2006 to perfectly fine reviews. The parade was nothing new physically, with all the floats from the previous version simply being altered to remove the snow globe designs that had become the butt of many jokes in later years, but it did feature an updated soundtrack borrowed from Tokyo Disneyland's 2004 daytime parade, Disney Dreams on Parade Moving On. An update for certain, definitely not a new parade though. Beyond the new soundtrack, some new choreography, and minor changes to the parade floats, guests were keen to notice that, in fact, it was the exact same parade from 2001 with a bit of a fresh coat of paint. But it saved money in its development and still was popular enough, so management called it a day and let the idea of a new parade at Magic Kingdom rest for a few more years. To understand where the story takes us next, we have to briefly travel across the country over to the original Disneyland Park, which was finishing up its 50th anniversary celebration in 2008. Like the 100th Year of Magic in Disney World, Disneyland's 50th came with a slew of new entertainment offerings, including 2 brand new parades. And with the conclusion of the celebration, both of these parades would be taking their final bows. These parades being Block Party Bash at Disney California Adventure and Walt Disney's Parade of Dreams at Disneyland Park. It's no secret that Disneyland management and Walt Disney World management exist in very separate bubbles from each other and often make choices directly contradictory to one another. This partially has to do with the crowd culture at each resort, with Disneyland being home to a majority local audience who might come several times a year, and Walt Disney World being the so-called vacation capital of the world, where it was, and to a certain extent still is, much more common for visitors to return every 2 to 5 years, if at all. So, being 3 years old, these parades seemed out of date in the eyes of Disneyland management, but Walt Disney World saw an opportunity. By November of 2008, it was already in the works for Walt Disney World to receive California Adventure's parade Block Party Bash, where it would eventually premiere at Hollywood Studios later that year. But originally, the plan for Coast-Coastal transfer didn't just stop at Block Party. With Disney Dreams Come True's overlayish nature becoming seemingly more apparent by the second, Walt Disney World management considered yet another cost-conscious alternative plan to creating an all-new parade. It was planned that following Walt Disney's Parade of Dreams run at Disneyland, it would be shipped to Magic Kingdom, where it would permanently replace Disney Dreams Come True. The parade in Disneyland had received a reputation unlike anything the park had seen in a very long time, and was as a whole visually breathtaking, with giant floats that towered above the streets and incredibly impressive audio animatronic figures and elaborate puppets. Parade of Dreams was a spectacular from every angle. And since Disneyland was just gonna get rid of it, Walt Disney World figured they could piggyback off the success that Disneyland had seen with the parade. And the best part? Disney World wouldn't have to actually spend a cent on actually creating a brand new parade. Sure, the thing had been at Disneyland for 3 years, but for Disney World, it could be seen as something shiny and brand spanking new regardless. However, in their haste to grab onto the success of Disneyland's 50th anniversary, Magic Kingdom management unfortunately overlooked one crucial detail. Longtime viewers of this channel may remember that when we talked about the Paint the Night electrical parade almost 4 years ago now, we discussed the parade's unrealized Magic Kingdom run in 2017, where the parade never ended up premiering at Magic Kingdom due to a particularly tight turn along the parade corridor that some larger units in the parade were unable to navigate. Well, despite the fact that this seems like a pretty major mistake to not think about, this wasn't actually the first time this had happened, as actually the first instance of an incident like this is the next plot point in our story. Upon doing some feasibility testing for Parade of Dreams in late 2008, it was discovered that due to many of the floats' length, width, and in some cases height, almost all of the floats in Parade of Dreams were unable to maneuver the Magic Kingdom's tight parade corridor, and thus, much to the chagrin of management, these plans for transferring the parade had to be shelved. While this left Disneyland in a bit of an interesting situation, since they were now stuck with a parade they weren't going to be running anymore, Walt Disney World still had Disney Dreams Come True running, so despite the parade's still ever-aging nature, it wasn't the absolute end of the world. However, with plans to outright replace the parade dead in the water with the rapid aging of the show becoming more and more apparent, it was decided to refurbish Disney Dreams Come True one more time, though this time things would be a bit more extensive. And though January 23rd, 2009 saw the third version of the offering debut with the newly renamed Celebrate a Dream Come True parade, this was only intended to again be a temporary solution, with plans for a new parade to begin being drawn up that same year, now with Walt Disney World reluctantly prepared to foot the bill themselves. Plans for a new parade began being thought up pretty much immediately after Celebrate a Dream Come True opened in early 2009, but this blue sky phase of not even knowing what the parade itself would be themed to would prove to be short-lived. On September 12, 2009, Disney announced that they would be giving the Magic Kingdom the largest single expansion in the park's almost 40-year history, as the park's aging and underwhelming Fantasyland area would be receiving a much-needed overhaul. Along with updates to the existing Fantasyland, the entire northeastern portion of the park would be getting a facelift, as the plan also included the removal of the aging Mickey's Toontown Fair and the neighboring former plot of the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea submarine voyage, which had closed over 15 years prior by this point, with a permanent replacement never fully realized. While plans weren't completely finalized until long after they broke ground, construction on the expansion officially begun in the former spot of the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea submarine voyage in February of 2010, with the closure of the temporary occupant of the land, Pooh's Playful Spot, followed by the permanent closure of Mickey's Toontown Fair on February 8, 2011. With New Fantasyland moving along at a steady pace with a planned opening in 2012, it was seen as the perfect marketing opportunity to tie the opening of the brand new parade in with the brand new land and have it themed to the various and new returning offerings that could be seen there. And so the reins were handed over from Walt Disney World's own financing to Walt Disney Creative Entertainment, with the project now under the control of designer Richard Imprada and creative director Stephen Davison, along with managing producer Chris Bunner. And so the concept was born, and it was decided that the parade would debut with the grand opening of New Fantasyland. Only one small problem. New Fantasyland was constantly changing. Even after ground had been broken, attractions kept getting altered or removed entirely, new rides were being planned, and offerings were moving from location to location with all these changes. Opening dates were getting pushed back. This affected the new parade as well, which was obviously supposed to debut alongside the new land. So while the first phase of New Fantasyland was completed and opened to the public in December of 2012, it was decided to hold the new parade, which at the time had still not been announced, till the entire land was completed. The final phase of the project would be the brand new e-ticket family roller coaster, Seven Dwarves Mine Train, which was added to the plan late in the game, replacing what was originally planned to be a large fairy tale meet and greet complex, and was planned to open in 2014. And so, with New Fantasyland officially, at least partially open by January of 2013, and the haphazardly thrown together third version of the Dream Come True Parade now on track to outlast the original version from 2001, in April of 2013, Disney officially announced plans for the brand new parade. Not a refurbished one, not one shipped from another park, an entirely new parade. The first Magic Kingdom would have seen in over a decade. It was named the Disney Festival of Fantasy Parade, and it was to debut in early 2014. Originally, it was rumored that the new parade would be longer than any daytime parade in Walt Disney World history, and would feature upwards of 25 brand new floats, some so large that entirely new storage facilities would need to be constructed backstage just to house the new offering. While the truth was, well, not that extraordinary, the parade's immense nature was not entirely overstated. Though not the record-breaking 25 new floats, the new facilities rumor wasn't too far from the truth. While it's unclear if it is indeed true that these new facilities needed to be constructed for housing the new units built for the parade, what is known is that 2013 was the very last holiday season to feature the festive garland strands hung across the buildings on Main Street, as a few units in the new parade would exceed the height limit put in place by the garland, and therefore, as not to force a 2-month hiatus for the new offering, it was decided discontinuing the garland would be an easier solution. And while there were not 25 brand new floats being built, there were quite a few newly constructed for the parade, as well as a couple being shipped from overseas. And so, with work from the creative team underway, now with famed Soundsational and World of Color composer Mark Hammond tapped to do the soundtrack, work continued chugging along at a steady pace. Eventually, on January 4th, 2014, almost 13 years after its initial premiere, the Celebrate a Dream Come True parade held a long overdue and yet still very emotional final performance. While fans were somewhat thankful to see the now third incarnation of the parade finally ending, many were still saddened to see the long-running parade go into storage. When push comes to shove, in reality, while under 3 different names, the parade had become the single longest-running daytime parade in Disney history at the time, running almost uninterrupted for almost 13 consecutive years at Magic Kingdom. While becoming more and more outdated by the day, it still had centered itself as somewhat of a classic in the eyes of visitors, local and abroad alike. However, following a media preview of some of the features of the new parade, including a few floats and many of the new costumes on February 10th, the parade's Spring 2014 premiere date approached, with fans eagerly awaiting to find out what was to come.
But I can tell you this, our new Festival of Fantasy Parade will be unlike anything you have ever seen before in the Magic Kingdom.
On March 9th, 2014, the spectacular new Festival of Fantasy Parade finally premiered to the public. Being the first new full parade to come to the Magic Kingdom since 2001, expectations were incredibly high, and amazingly, the new parade exceeded even the wildest of them. Featuring 9 dazzling new parade floats across 7 themed units and over 60 performers and dancers in an incredible new and elaborate costumes, Festival of Fantasy didn't just exceed people's expectations, it defined the new standard for daytime parades going forward. Following its premiere, Festival of Fantasy became a phenomenon unlike any singular daytime parade in history. Sure, Parade of Dreams blew people's socks off in 2005, but that was connected to an event that had several focal points on its own. Festival of Fantasy became the it girl of Disney entertainment globally. The piece of marketing material that was supposed to push New Fantasyland over the edge and make it go one step beyond what people were expecting became its own showstopper entirely. As if New Fantasyland itself wasn't enough to warrant a visit or revisit to Magic Kingdom in the mid-2010s, this dazzling new spectacular certainly was. And visit they did. During the parade's first year of operation, it wasn't uncommon for crowds to gather 30 to 60 minutes before the parade began just to get a good spot. The demand for the offering was so high, Disney needed to give it its own Fast Pass viewing area later in 2014, just to give those on a time crunch another option to see it. though it's debated if this decision was based on the parade's popularity alone or the FastPass Plus system needing a larger catalog of experiences under its belt. Either way, for years to come, the parade became a staple of a day at Magic Kingdom, and because of that, the parade didn't really change all that much, if at all, over the first 6 years of its run, other than a single incident in 2018 where the fire-breathing Maleficent Dragon float caught a blaze during a performance and was subsequently removed from the parade for a number of months while necessary repairs were made. Nope, other than that, amidst a number of management and guest experience changes, over the next half a decade and change, the parade remained completely intact all the way up until March 15th, 2020, when the original run of the parade held its very last performance. This wasn't a previously announced closure or refurbishment or anything like that. No, in fact, at the time, it wasn't even known that March 15th would be the last performance of the original run of the parade at all, as it was a direct result of the closure of all the Disney parks globally as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Walt Disney World, for better or worse, sprung back into at least partial operation quite quickly with the park's phased reopening beginning on July 11th of 2020. However, while most of the park's attractions returned to operation, none of the resort's dozens of entertainment offerings did the same. Instead, in the case of Festival of Fantasy at least, short impromptu cavalcades were implemented along Magic Kingdom's parade route as a chance to give a quick hello to various Disney characters. However, none of these featured any elements of Festival of Fantasy. None of the floats, nor the soundtrack. This lack of true entertainment at the parks would become a running theme worldwide upon each resort's reopening, and was essentially moved from a temporary solution to long-term decision when from September to December of 2020, the company laid off over 32,000 cast members, including almost the entirety of the entertainment department, which of course included all the parade performers. It's no wonder that this decision was the brainchild of CEO Bob Chapek, whose bad reputation of putting cost-cutting and the bottom line before all else reigned true time and time again during the company's response to the global pandemic. As a result of this decision, the quote-unquote temporary cavalcades became more of a semi-permanent thing in the coming months, with the return to full operations for entertainment delayed indefinitely by the layoffs. Although, while blame can, and by all accounts should, be placed on Chapek for making these cost-conscious decisions, some blame does fall on Walt Disney World's management, as when many of the other parks around the world began to reopen, such as Disneyland Resort in California, the other parks were much more eager to get back to full operation as soon as possible, and this included, in most cases, entertainment offerings. For Disneyland, full parades and shows came back as soon as safety regulations allowed them, with Christmas of 2021 seeing the almost completely full return of the classic A Christmas Fantasy Parade, and subsequently the return of the Main Street Electrical Parade in time for its 50th anniversary in 2022. Walt Disney World, on the other hand, wasn't that eager. The parks were back on their feet financially without the full entertainment lineup, and it was seen as an unnecessary cost to bring the full pre-COVID offerings back. Even for the resort's 50th anniversary in 2021, this mindset remained, with the Magic Kingdom receiving no new or returning parades for the celebration, instead seeing the arrival of another new temporary cavalcade in its place. It would be almost 2 full years before a full parade would return to daily operations at the Magic Kingdom, as finally, during the Destination D23 event on November 20th of 2021, Parks and Resorts Chairman Josh D'Amaro announced that among other returning favorites such as Fantasmic and the Castle Stage Show, Festival of Fantasy would finally be back to performing along the Magic Kingdom's parade route the following March. And eventually, after 4 more months of waiting, fans gathered along the parade route on March 9th to witness the return of the fan-favorite parade on the day of its 8th anniversary. But sadly, the hype and excitement was short-lived. The second the parade stepped out of the gate on March 9th, 2022, it became immediately clear that this was not the same Festival of Fantasy parade that had run prior to the park's 2020 closure, as sadly the parade had become a victim of the Bob Chapek management-era cost cuts, turning the procession into a shell of its former self. Floats were doled down and removed, dozens of performers were cut from the parade or had choreography simplified, and one entire unit from the parade was taken out in its entirety. The parade had basically been turned into itself a glorified cavalcade, taking the float count from 9 down to 7, and most drastically, taking the number of actual performers in the parade down from over 60 to now just 12 total. To say it was a disappointment was an incredible understatement. And sadly, that's the state the parade remains in to this day. On top of all the changes made during the parade's 2022 remount, aging, and a myriad of maintenance issues, it's not at all uncommon for 1 or more floats to be missing from the parade on a daily basis. Some days it's so bad that the entire procession from end to end can be as few as 5 floats long. The story of Festival of Fantasy is a modern Disney tragedy. It went from the greatest daytime parade in Disney history to one of the very worst. The parade that was meant to usher in the new era of entertainment at the resort and put the old, decaying, and dated past in the past now had become just what it was created to replace. An old, decaying, and dated parade long past its prime, moved along by poor management decisions and a lack of care and effort. And while there seemed to be constant rumors of the parade's replacement in the air, from a new parade for the resort's 50th anniversary, for something in time for the completion of Tiana's Bayou Adventure, at this time, honestly, it's anyone's guess on if and when Festival of Fantasy will finally be replaced. We'll talk about this more in the conclusion, but suffice to say, the parade is nothing like what it once was 10 years ago. But that said, even Disney seems to be aware that the parade is nearing the end of its lifespan. So maybe the announcement of a replacement to the parade isn't too far out of the realm of possibility after all. With all that said, let's move on to the parade's design. For this segment, we're going to look at each unit in this parade, point out notable elements on the floats, costumes, soundtrack, and any other notable details, and talk about how each unit changed over the past 10 years, mostly in regards to the show's 2022 remount. So without any further delay, let's get started. The parade opens with a trumpeting fanfare as the soundtrack begins under an announcement from legendary voice actor Corey Burton, welcoming the audience and inviting them to join in with the festivities before we hear the first taste of the parade's actual bass soundtrack.
Hear ye! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Magic Kingdom. You are warmly invited to join Mickey Mouse and his Fantasyland friends for a magical celebration in the streets. Dreams will come true, hearts will soar, and you will become a part of the magic. For the time has come to take your places and prepare to welcome the wondrous and wonderful Disney Festival of Fantasy Parade!
While the intro itself has changed very little over the past decade, sounding near identical to its premiere, the announcement of the parade's arrival was altered when the parade returned in 2022, with a new recording with a notably different announcer removing the ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls line in favor of the gender-neutral phrasing royal guests from near and far. This change goes in lines with the Disney Parks' Fifth Key initiative, which intends to make the company as a whole, both onstage and off, a more inclusive place for all who venture to it. While the new narration is a tad clunky, it's not really the fault of the line change, more just the fact that the current voice of the announcer for Magic Kingdom moves through the script a bit slower, dragging the announcement on a bit. Anyway, as the intro ends and the parade truly begins, we also hear our first taste of the parade's brand new soundtrack, appropriately titled Festival of Fantasy. The new song, composed by Mark Hammond, is heard in the underliner, segmented with Mozart's Sonata No. 13, A Little Night Music, specifically the Spring Serenade portion. It's unknown if this specific choice of song was made as a direct reference to something within the Disney canon, or if it was just a piece of classical music that happened to fit in very well with the main theme, as well as the parade's underlying tone, but it's seen in multiple parts of the parade alongside the main underliner. Anyway, enough about the soundtrack, let's get into the meat of the thing. The first section of this parade is the Princess Garden. Beginning with a group of 6 Swan Court dancers in elaborate avian-themed dresses and suits, the float itself features 4 pairs of Disney royals across the span of the giant 50-foot multi-part garden unit. This section of the parade is meant to represent a couple of different things depending on how you look at it. It can be seen as the royal intro to the parade with the residents of Fantasyland of the Kingdom all gathered to open the processional, but it can also be seen as almost a unifying bridge linking the classic stories of the existing Fantasyland area with New Age Disney royalty, all of which, of course, have at least some representation in the new expansion. It could also be said that the float is meant to represent the new Princess Fairy Tale Hall meet and greet space, which opened as part of New Fantasyland's expansion in the former Snow White's Scary Adventure space. Anyway, despite its elegance and artistry tying it perfectly into the New Fantasyland theme of the parade in a number of ways, this float is surprisingly one of 2 to actually not be created for the parade at all. and is actually a recycled float from Tokyo Disneyland's 25th anniversary parade, Jubilation, which ran from 2008 until 2013. Also appearing in the parade's opening unit in Tokyo, the float received a few minor changes during its travels from Tokyo to Orlando, with only one section of the float at the back altered very significantly. In Tokyo, the front of the float features Belle and the Beast in his human form underneath a swirl of roses and two peacocks. While this remains mostly intact at Walt Disney World, the Beast appears in his, well, beast form instead, and two banners featuring the parade's logo and reading "Join the Celebration" are added alongside them. Directly behind them stand Cinderella and Prince Charming underneath a large recreation of the scene in the movie where Cinderella's animal friends help construct a dress for her to go to the balls. Jacques, Gus, Susie, and Perla are all seen on the side of the rotating turntable along the dress's bodice, while the bluebirds add fabric from above. This section was identical in both Jubilation and Festival of Fantasy. The back of the float was altered the most, but this wasn't originally the plan. In Tokyo, this back section of the float featured another turntable on which Aurora and Prince Philip from Sleeping Beauty are seen on one side of another section of Rose Garden, with the owl and birds creating the faux prince from the I Know You sequence from the film on the other side. But the critters were removed during the float's cross-continental transfer in order for an additional royal couple to be added, specifically Princess Tiana and Prince Naveen from The Princess and the Frog, accompanied by Ray the Firefly. Originally, it was planned for Aurora and Philip to remain in their places from Tokyo, as reflected by the initial premiere version of the parade's soundtrack, which features a snippet of I Know You. However, following the winter 2013 release of the box office smash hit Frozen, this portion of the parade was hastily altered prior to its March 2014 premiere in order to add Anna, Elsa, and Olaf in an effort to capitalize on the movie's instant success. The Rose Garden was replaced on one side by an icy landscape reminiscent of the North Mountain from the film, with the remaining foliage draped in a white blanket of snow. While at the time of the parade's debut, the Sleeping Beauty song was still featured alongside tracks from the other films represented, on May 1st, 2014, the parade stepped off with an altered soundtrack now featuring a quick mashup of For the First Time and Forever and Let It Go in its place. The other songs featured in the unit include Beauty and the Beast and A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes. During the 2022 remount, much of this float was altered, including the complete removal of the opening swan court, as well as adding a decorative green metallic fabric runner along the side of the Beauty and the Beast section. The entire unit received a new color scheme at this time, and a few of the rose bushes that had been present since the float's days in Jubilation were removed in favor of metallic green shrubs matching the Beauty and the Beast runners with designs reminiscent of swans seen alongside them, possibly as a reference to the former swan court dancers. The Princess and the Frog section also saw a new backdrop installed, replacing the former Rose Garden aesthetic with foliage more reminiscent of swamp plants. While the princes, and also Anna for some reason, were absent from the parade during its initial return, this was only in accordance to Disney's social distancing guidelines, and they all returned to their former places alongside their counterparts on April 18th of the same year. Possibly due to the parade's age, or solely a lack of maintenance, in the current run of the parade, it is not at all uncommon for metal screeches and creaks to be heard from the various animated elements of the float as it slowly makes its way down the parade route. Following the opening, we come to the first true unit of the parade with the Tangled unit. Preceded by 4 floral maidens and a large inflatable rendition of the mime-passionate thug from the movie, Ulf, this float depicts a 36-foot-long Viking ship decorated as the Snuggly Duckling pub, meant to represent Rapunzel, Flynn, and the gang off seeking new experiences on the high seas in its search of exciting new adventures. This section of the parade is meant to represent the addition of the small Tangled-themed mini-land that was added in the northwest corner of Fantasyland, replacing the former Skyway Station, which had been abandoned and used as stroller parking since 1999. Though not directly connected to the new Fantasyland expansion, as it was in fact nowhere near the rest of the work and consisted of nothing but a small plaza and some restrooms, but it was still something new around the same era and was based on a hit new-ish Disney film that had very little in-park representation, so it felt like the right choice either way. The Viking boat is the first of 6 brand new floats created completely from scratch for Festival of Fantasy and features many fun details and elements. The ship features 3 giant swinging axes that, well, swing back and forth across the float with some stunt performers upon them. The one in the middle features Flynn Rider opposing Maximus the horse. Rapunzel is seen on the front of the float with her long braided hair stretching across the entire construction, with a small animatronic Pascal nearby. A sign displaying the Snuggly Duckling name is located on the front, and there are several oars and shields along the side of the float, making the boat look more boaty. Milson, the goat, yes, I had to Google who this character was, is pictured on the back of the float in animatronic form, chewing on a wanted poster for Flynn, of course with his nose drawn incorrectly. The soundtrack starts to feature the sounds of crashing furniture and breaking glass, setting the ambient mood of the Snuggly Duckling alongside songs from the film, When Will My Life Begin, and the Snuggly Duckling anthem, I've Got a Dream. While this unit fared better than others in terms of the 2022 remount, with the vast majority of its pre-pandemic glory returning, the number of Floral Maiden dancers in front of the float was reduced from 4 to just 2, and their choreography was also significantly dumbed down. Up next, we have a unit based on the Disney Renaissance classic, The Little Mermaid. Fashion runway model-style dancers in under-the-sea garb are featured in front of a float decorated to look like an elaborate seashell music box. The unit represents one of the brand new rides that was added to New Fantasyland, Under the Sea, Journey of the Little Mermaid, an Omnimover dark ride synopsis through the film that had also opened at Disney California Adventure in 2011 under the name The Little Mermaid, Ariel's Undersea Adventure. The dancers up front are seen in a variety of elaborate costumes that are decadently constructed out of beautiful fabrics and materials. There are 4 in total up front: the lionfish, the sparkling seashell, and 2 twin coral girls. An additional 2 dancers are located behind the float, bringing the total count to 6, wearing spinning stained glass-style pinwheel seahorses and decorated with stylized bubbles and waves. The float itself is full of fun details. While it is the shortest lengthwise in the parade, it's packed full of whimsy and charm from the movie. In fact, the float itself is quite reminiscent of a previously appearing Little Mermaid parade float from 1996's Remember the Magic parade. Though, given that many of the Little Mermaid floats from around the world share this aesthetic, it's possible this is purely a coincidence rather than a carefully constructed callback. Ariel in mermaid form is seen seated in a large clamshell with flounder swimming in circles overhead and a pair of alternating fishy carousels below, reminiscent of the Under the Sea segment from the film. The base of the float is decorated with spinning starfish and clamshells in a sandy seabed, along with a large seaweed plant in the back of the unit. The crustaceous composer Sebastian from the film is also seen on the float in front, leading a pair of goldfish pulling the float forward. His animatronic form seen here is actually a fun little piece of Walt Disney World history on its own, and a sweet reference to a former Magic Kingdom parade. The animatronic scene here is actually the very same one that appeared in Walt Disney World's legendary long-running Spectro Magic nighttime parade from 1991 to 2010, though this edition of the animatronic had only been added in 2001. You see, with all the positive press from Disney announcing an entire new parade with Festival of Fantasy, they carefully snuck in a bit of tragically sad news into the press announcement, where buried deep in Disney's press release it was revealed that the aforementioned Spectro Magic parade would not return to Magic Kingdom and had in fact been destroyed. As a tribute to the legendary fallen parade, the animatronic Sebastian from the parade's Little Mermaid Under the Sea unit was added to Festival of Fantasy as a metaphorical bridge between the past and the future. Anyway, moving on to a more positive note, the soundtrack in this segment features the main theme from the parade, supplemented by songs from the movie, Under the Sea, Kiss the Girl, and Part of Your World. While it does exist in a bubble of its own, so to speak, because it is an original soundtrack, the Little Mermaid unit in particular bears a striking resemblance musically to the Little Mermaid unit in Mickey's Soundsational parade at Disneyland, with a lot of arrangements and progressions nearly identical between the two, despite the fact that both shows have strikingly different underliner themes and aren't even written in the same key. It's no wonder that composer Mark Hammond worked on both parades within a relatively similar time frame, and both arrangements work in each respective parade quite well regardless, so what's the harm in a little sharing and caring between coasts? While this unit was left mostly intact in the 2022 remount, the performer cuts continued here as well, with the Seahorse Boys behind the float being removed, now just leaving the 4 runway model dancers in front. The actual costumes for the coral dancers were slightly modernized during this time as well, with a new, slightly darker look to the coral backpiece and fans. Unlike the rest of the parade, however, portions of this unit's original choreography were retained. Up next comes the Peter Pan unit. While not directly connected to a part of the expansion, it is likely the decision to include this IP was the result of either Disney's late-stage changes to the new Fantasyland master plan, as early renderings showed a Pixie Hollow meet-and-greet area, or the fact that the one remaining opening day Fantasyland dark ride-style attraction remaining in the park following the expansion was Peter Pan's Flight, essentially turning this part of the parade into a meeting of the old and the new. This portion of the parade opens with 6 dancers dressed as the Lost Boys from the film. A fox, a skunk, a bear, a rabbit, and a pair of twin raccoons carrying hula hoops, all performing Newsies-style choreography. Behind them, Skull Rock emerges at the foot of a massive arching rainbow that spans the entire float. Atop it, a whole 28 feet off the ground, sits the Jolly Roger pirate ship, with Peter Pan and Wendy at the helm and Captain Hook dangling from an acre down below. The ship rocks forward and back, and the cannons on the sides feature a smoke effect. At the back of the sparkling rainbow, we see Tinkerbell sitting in a bed of oversized flowers. Smee is pictured walking on foot just behind the float, and of course, with Captain Hook in peril, Tik-Tok the crocodile is never far away, seen here in float form. Fun fact about the crocodile float, this is actually the only float in the parade to neither be originally constructed for the new offering or shipped from another Disney park. Nope, actually this version of Tik-Tok was indeed original to Magic Kingdom, but not to Festival of Fantasy. This little guy has been appearing in parades since 2007's Enchanted Adventures Parade, which ran exclusively during the now long-defunct Pirate and Princess parties. Pushing just past Jubilation's 2008 debut, this makes Tik-Tok the single oldest float in the parade. After Pirate and Princess parties ceased operation, he would later be added to Mickey's Boo-to-You Halloween Parade, before eventually premiering with Festival of Fantasy in 2014. Despite the figure not being completely original to the parade, Festival of Fantasy did mark the first time the float appeared in daily operations on a regular basis outside of a special ticketed event. The Peter Pan unit also features the most songs out of any unit in the parade from one movie, with A Pirate's Life, You Can Fly, Following the Leader, The Second Star to the Right, and The Elegant Captain Hook all heard throughout this portion of the soundtrack. During the 2022 remount, the number of performers in this unit was reduced, with the Lost Boy Raccoon Twins getting axed along with Mr. Smee. Wendy was also moved from her former position at the helm of the Jolly Roger with Peter down to the ground with the Lost Boys. While this was originally in accordance with Disney's social distancing guidelines, her position was retained down on the ground with the boys long after the rest of the social distancing-based changes were reversed. Tik-Tok the crocodile was also completely removed from the parade, shortening the unit significantly. As he has not appeared in any parade since 2020, it can be assumed that the float has been permanently retired. Appearing as the parade's sole Pixar representation, up next comes a unit based on Brave. 4 Celtic couples are pictured, 8 Highlander dancers in total, wearing kilts, boots, and lots of plaid, performing a wide array of choreography. They appear in front of a grand float fashioned as oversized bagpipes, signaling the arrival of Merida. This portion of the parade is loosely rooted in the Brave Fairy Tale Garden meet and greet area that was erected following the movie's 2012 premiere. And while the area had been somewhat dulled down following the initial marketing phase of the movie, it did continue to exist in one form or another all the way up until 2023. In fact, some of the initially removed elements from the meet and greet area ended up being repurposed into the parade float, as Merida's 3 brothers in bear form, who previously appeared as animatronics in a backdrop in the meet and greet, were relocated to the bagpipes float in Festival of Fantasy following the end of the movie's initial marketing push. Of course, it wouldn't be a Brave float without its protagonist, and indeed, Merida is pictured high upon her majestic crown. The float has many unique details calling back to the movie, including the aforementioned bears, piles of archery equipment, and a plate of the Empire biscuits spinning above Merida's head. This is all accompanied by the parade soundtrack featuring Remember to Smile, Fate and Destiny, and Touch the Sky on top of the parade's main theme. In terms of the 2022 remount, this portion of the parade truly got the short end of the stick, as it was the only unit in the parade not only to be reduced in scale, but in fact removed entirely, including all 8 Highlander dancers, Merida herself, and the enormous bagpipes float. It is not slated to return at any point, making the parade significantly shorter, and rumor has it the bagpipes float itself has been cannibalized for parts at this point, as the parade is so old now that finding replacements for parts such as batteries and other elements has become quite difficult if they need to be replaced. So scrapping an unused floats for parts becomes, at this point, a much cheaper proposition as opposed to having to fabricate custom parts from scratch. Of course, it wouldn't be a Festival of Fantasy video without discussing the main focus of this parade's marketing and arguably its most flashy feature, the iconic Maleficent Dragon. Proceeding on the ground are the 3 good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, along with Prince Philip. They dash around battling a pair of menacing ravens as well as a trio of 3 large performers on stilts fashioned as thorny vines. The choreography sees Philip fighting against the thorn stilts with his sword as he seeks to destroy the focal point of the unit, the massive 53-foot-long steampunk fire-breathing Maleficent Dragon float. Standing 26 feet tall and constructed entirely out of menacing thorns, wood, and metal pieces, the float was constructed on an articulating chassis, allowing the float to bend and flex in accordance to the dragon's movements. This was a first for a Disney parade, in the US at least. Another singular raven brings up the rear, articulating the movement of the dragon's tail. Pretty much out of the gate, this float became the most iconic piece of this parade, appearing in merchandise, pretty much all marketing materials for the new show, and even a park map for a while. Disney even tried to catch lightning in a bottle and duplicate the float at Disneyland Paris in 2017, where it debuted in the new 25th anniversary Disney Stars on Parade in an effort to make the cheap new budget parade appear more spectacular. It didn't work. And of course, it wouldn't be a true discussion of this topic without mentioning this. Famously, on May 11th, 2018, the float appeared in just as spectacular a state as it ever did. It just so happened to be in a bit of a different way. Along the pathway in Liberty Square, about halfway through the route, the fire-breathing effect in the dragon's mouth malfunctioned, causing the front portion of the float to go up in flames. The fire was extinguished within a few minutes, and luckily no injuries were reported from the performing cast or the float's operators, but there was significant damage done to the float, and it was clear that it would not be in an operable form for some time. The parade continued dragonless for several months while work was carried out on the float, with the infamous decades-old terrace float filling in its place for the time being, featuring Prince Philip and, for the first time in the parade's history, Princess Aurora as well. Aurora had been missing from the unit previously due to the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, she was originally intended to have a place on the opening float. The dragon would be missing in action for a full 8 months before making her triumphant return to the parade on January 25th, 2019. Prior to the 2022 remount, this unit was one of very few in the parade to experience alterations beyond those done to the parade's post-COVID return, as the Raven wings for the pair of avians up front were found to be heavy and uncomfortable for the performers, and so they were changed from being an external costume piece to pieces of fabric sewed into the sleeves not long after the parade's debut in 2015. This version of the wings would end up lasting all the way until the unit's fire-related absence, when upon the Dragon's 2019 return, the original look of the Raven wings was returned to the parade as well, with a new version of the costume that was lighter and had a wider range of movement. During the parade's extended absence, in 2021, this float made a return prior to that of the whole parade, as during the ill-fated and overpriced Disney After Hours Boo Bash Halloween event, the Dragon, the Ravens, and the Thornstilts appeared in a brand new cavalcade dubbed Maleficent's Fiery Prowl. This was meant to take the place of the Boo to You Halloween parade, which was seen as too expensive to bring back in full at the time. The cavalcade featured a generic, stock music-based rock guitar soundtrack and was strongly disliked by guests, despite being considered the main attraction of the event. Of course, the float did eventually return to the parade it started in when the 2022 remount came around, but in line with the other portions of the parade, there were some things cut. The front Ravens, who were present at the After Hours event, were removed, as well as one of the Thornstilts, now leaving Philip fighting back against just two. It was certainly one of the more mild changes to the parade, but given how small and seemingly inconsequential it was, given the fact that the Ravens had just appeared at the After Hours event, it just sort of added insult to injury. At last, evil is defeated, happiness is restored to the kingdom, and it's time for our grand finale, which is kicked off by a massive cavalcade of characters and dancers. Jiminy Cricket, the Mad Hatter, the White Rabbit, Alice, as well as Snow White and all 7 of her dwarves arrive on foot to signal the arrival of the circus-themed finale, complete with 4 dancers with elaborate candy-colored costumes affectionately known as the Bubble Girls. While the Pinocchio and Alice in Wonderland characters are meant to represent the existing areas in Fantasyland, specifically the restaurant, Pinocchio's Village House, and the Mad Tea Party Spinner Ride, the Snow White contingent is directly connected to a new addition, that of course being the main e-ticket roller coaster, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. It can also be assumed that due to the delayed nature of the attraction, with the concept only being added to the plan following Tom Staggs' arrival on the project, once construction had already started in January of 2010, that the characters were likely put into the parade's finale because it was too late in development for them to receive their own themed unit in the parade on their own. I mean, hell, the ride itself wouldn't even open until 2 months after the parade debuted in May of 2014. This cavalcade of characters is followed by the first of the 2 finale floats, starting off with Pinocchio riding atop a stylized Monstro the Whale, the first portion of the more than 90-foot-long circus float themed around Fantasia. This unit is probably the most direct connection to a new experience within New Fantasyland, that being the Fantasyland Storybook Circus Miniland, which replaced the majority of the Mickey's Toontown Fair area. This is a bit ironic, as this is one of the other floats that came from Tokyo Disneyland's Jubilation, and was not created especially for this parade. In Tokyo, it had pretty much the same theme of a bubble circus with Pinocchio and, strangely, the 3 little pigs for some reason. Also in Jubilation, it featured some absolutely terrifying clown costumes because... honestly, I have no idea. Beyond the costumes and characters, the only real structural difference between the 2 floats is that, while previously Monstro's waterspout caused Jiminy Cricket trapped in a bubble to float up and down, in Festival of Fantasy, he was replaced by the angelfish Cleo in a glass fishbowl. And additionally, Figaro the cat was added to the carousel directly behind, trying to swat Cleo out of her bowl. This was done actually as a heartfelt callback to the previous Dreams Come True parade, where on the previously appearing Pinocchio unit, a similar scene was pictured with Figaro in an animatronic form attempting to swipe up Cleo. The circus theme continues running along the float with a spinning carousel and Ferris wheel, as well as a fully realized Dumbo animatronic figure seated on Monstro's tail. Timothy Mouse is pictured just below him along with Donald and Daisy. The centerpiece of the float is a giant rotating trapeze set twirled around in circles by a large elephant. Several characters from Fantasia are also seen twirling around the elephant, including statues of hippos, alligators, ostriches, and Pegasus horses. The Pegasus horse theming also continues above, with the trapeze occupied by 2 swinging Pegasus girl dancers. Pluto is also seen on the back of the float. Oh, and the entire unit blows bubbles. Chip, Dale, and Goofy, all in their circus outfits, join 4 stunning Cha-Cha Bingo circus dancers, acting as grand marshals to the true finale. Mickey and Minnie in their specially designed costumes riding a massive 32-foot-tall hot air balloon. More hippos are seen holding down the stunning airship float that, despite being created by Disney for the new parade, perfectly matches the style of the previous Jubilation float that had been acquired. The music in the finale is upbeat and hip, featuring the Mickey Mouse Club March, Zippity Doo-Dah, When I See an Elephant Fly, Whistle While You Work, I've Got No Strings, and When You Wish Upon a Star. It is strikingly a bit similar to the musical finale of the Paint the Night Electrical Parade at Hong Kong Disneyland, as well as its Anaheim, California clone, which, surprise surprise, was also composed by Mark Hammond. An additional 2 Cha-Cha Bingos carry a banner with the parade's logo, as well as Mickey Mouse in his airship costume, proclaiming "See ya real soon" to cap off this magnificent parade. And while I wish I could end the segment there, we do have to, of course, discuss the alterations made to the finale during the 2022 remount. In addition to the White Rabbit getting axed and the cavalcade, all of the dancers were removed from the unit, including the 4 Bubble Girls, the 4 Cha-Cha Bingos, and the additional 2 Cha-Cha Bingos on rope. The choreography for the remaining Snow White characters, as well as Alice, the Mad Hatter, and Jiminy Cricket, was also significantly dumbed down, essentially reduced to the absolute minimum amount of step-touch dancing possible. This was also the only portion of the parade to have the soundtrack altered as well, as when the parade returned, Zippity Doo-Dah and When I See an Elephant Fly were removed and replaced with instrumental interludes. This wasn't a budget-conscious decision, though. This decision was made in accordance with Disney's inclusivity initiative out of fears that the songs were either originally sung by or featured culturally insensitive depictions of African Americans. For a while, Minnie and Daisy were removed from their positions atop the floats and walked along with Chip, Dale, and Goofy in accordance to adhere with the social distancing guidelines, but Minnie migrated back onto the float next to Mickey on April 18th of 2022. However, for some reason, Daisy was never put back in her place and remains walking along the parade route while Donald sits alone on the float. Also, with the parade's lack of upkeep and maintenance combined with the parade often being sent out in Florida's less than ideal weather conditions, it is not at all uncommon for the Bubbles finale float to be absent from the parade for multiple days on end. On top of being absolutely massive and difficult to maintain, rumor has it that the float has ended up with quite a few serious maintenance issues in the past couple of years, rendering it occasionally unable to be sent out at all. You can even see evidence of this watching the parade when the unit is present, by seeing how the turntable in the finale featuring the trapeze, elephant, and Pegasus horses really doesn't move all that much anymore, especially compared to how it looked 5 years ago. On the occasions the float is removed, all the characters remain and are simply relegated to walking along the route in front of Mickey and Minnie's balloon, which typically remains as the parade's grand finale. In its current state, with no dancers in the unit, a simple, unthemed blue rope is carried by 2 cast members wearing the Storybook Circus attraction host costume, for some reason. While the parade's finale is nothing like it once was, it still has the same ending moment with a large swell in the music and finale fanfare. And with that, the Disney Festival of Fantasy Parade comes to a close, and wow, it sure is something. Let's talk about what I mean by that in the conclusion. Before I get into the depressive parts with the 2022 version of the parade and how sad it has become, I just want to preface this by saying that in regards to the original 2014 to 2020 run, Festival of Fantasy is probably my favorite American daytime parade ever created. Second only really to Walt Disney's Parade of Dreams from Disneyland's 50th anniversary, which, on a technicality, I actually never saw. So, you know, but seriously. Festival of Fantasy, when it premiered, was so ahead of its time and was able to dazzle audiences like pretty much no other parade has been able to. From absolutely stunning and gorgeous parade floats to dazzling and decadent new costumes to an absolute earworm of a soundtrack, truly Festival of Fantasy is just the perfect Disney daytime parade. It's all the spectacle and splendor you could have asked for and more. And so with that out of the way, this parade in its current state is a joke. I mean, seriously, at this point the thing is basically a glorified cavalcade. It's aging and it shows. I can almost count on two hands the number of performers, and above all else, it's been running for a full 10 years now. That's a long time for a daytime parade. Like, I adore this parade and everything it stood for in 2014, but now, 10 years later, and it's limping along as a shell of its former self, and even as what I would consider myself in the top 1% of fans of this parade, I can't in good conscience say I enjoy it anymore. Watching it now feels like you're looking at a ghost. You see the potential, you see the pieces of beauty and grace from the original version that remain, but then you look harder and you just see missed opportunities and remember what this thing you loved so much looked like before the bean counters got a hold of it and ripped it to shreds. Watching Festival of Fantasy these days isn't fun, it's just depressing. And like I said earlier, I really do see it as one of the biggest modern-day Disney tragedies. But if we take a step back for a second and look at things objectively, really look at this parade and how it's run and managed and compare that to other things from around the various corners of the Disney parks, there are some very interesting discrepancies. Like, for instance, take SpectroMagic, a parade that had so much more life in it that just faded into nothingness because poor management decisions literally destroyed it. Now, look at Festival of Fantasy, where it's pretty much the exact opposite. The life from this parade has been so thoroughly sucked out that it just feels so empty and hollow inside now. Like, I feel like I constantly mourn the loss of SpectroMagic because that story is just such an unnecessary tragedy. But I mean, God, if Spectro was looking as bad as FOF does right now, I wouldn't have thought twice when they destroyed it. And Spectro is more than double the age that Festival of Fantasy is currently, and it still looked miles better. The very reason this parade exists is because management was so budget-conscious and conservative with the funds that they dragged out the existing daytime parade till it was essentially inoperable because of how old it was, and they waited until the very last possible moment to actually double down and greenlight the budget for a new parade. And so the money was finally put in, and the product was spectacular. Now we're facing the same issue 10 years later. What's the reason there's no replacement to Festival of Fantasy yet? Why spend that money when you don't have to? Congratulations, Festival of Fantasy, you've officially become the one problem you were originally designed to fix. But honestly, the issues with this parade would be mitigated significantly if they would just put the money into fixing it. If Disney decided tomorrow to take the thing down for 6 months, freshen it up a little, restore what was lost, and put it back, maybe we'd have a different story. Like if Brave had actually come back and the dancers and the original choreography and all that, the parade would be looking so much better. But that said, 10 years is a very long time for even the best parade to be running. But what's possibly scariest out of all of this is there's no end in sight. We're not just stopping at 10. For all we know, it could be 11, 12, 13, so on and so forth before they actually finally put this parade out of its misery. And that's really such a shame because what this parade stood for and what it represented in 2014 deserves to get a proper and put together send-off. Something that spectacular shouldn't just be withering away for years and years on end until it finally is so broken and messy that it finally just fades out of existence with no one giving a damn because it's so old and fragmented. Festival of Fantasy, as it previously existed, deserves better than that. But honestly, with all that said, I do feel like it's only a matter of time until they finally replace this aging parade. Like, where the parks are at this time and under the management that they are, where I can't believe I'm saying this, I actually genuinely trust them to give us a solid and well-thought-out product, there's no way these same people are just saying, this right here, this looks totally fine, and we can keep running this for another X number of years. With Festival of Fantasy looking as barren and disheveled as it currently does, I can only assume that there has to be some sort of internal plan to replace it right now. Frankly, if anything else were to be the case, it wouldn't look the way it currently does. Or maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? In the end, at its heart, yeah, I really do still love this parade way deep down. It was spectacular when it premiered 10 years ago, and the parts that remain are still spectacular now, and if it had stayed the same, it would honestly still be just as spectacular as when it premiered. Honestly, outside of Tokyo, I can't really think of another parade that Disney has created since Festival of Fantasy, a daytime parade at least, that really lives up to that same incredible standard. Magic Happens has moments where it gets close, and obviously things like the choreography are better, but in reality, this is still kind of the highest we've ever reached. And underneath all those terrible decisions and budget cuts in later years still sits a really creative concept that truly stands the test of time quite well. Sure, it could have maybe used an update or two in later years, but it's still the same thing underneath. So to Festival of Fantasy, a very happy 10-year anniversary. Thank you for 10 years of dreams coming true, hearts soaring, and letting us be a part of the magic. The time has come to once again take your places and prepare to welcome the wondrous and wonderful Disney Festival of Fantasy Parade. Thank you for watching this episode of Live the Magic. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my YouTube channel. In order to not miss the next time we upload, be sure to click the bell icon to get notified when we upload a new video. We also have Instagram and Twitter now, so be sure to follow us on there to keep up to date with all the ridiculous things I might be up to. Links to those in the description of this video. If you have any topic suggestions for what you think I should cover on this show and others, please leave them in the comments below. And remember, it's a world where you belong, where you can dream aloud. So go and grab hold of your dreams and find your happily ever after today. Have a great, big, beautiful day, and remember, tomorrow is just a dream away.
Step into the magic. Watch the stories come to life. This is a celebration. Every color shines so bright. Turn on your light. Come on and live the magic. So much to find.